Hey, what's going on, everyone? Mano back here, and today we're checking out XUR for October 8th. He's going to be here in the Winding Cove. Go to this landing zone right here on the EVZ. And you're going to follow the path that you see here on screen. There's a couple of ways to get up there. We're going to go the ship way. Basically, you make your way up here. There's going to be a ship right here to the left-hand side. Some people were asking, hey, how do you find XUR so quickly? There's a couple of apps and things that you can use, but also you can just kind of know where he spawns in. So that's a really good way to start. So XUR is right here up by this fallen ship. You can approach him right now. He's got some interesting exotics this week. Definitely one you should pick up for this season. Telesto, projectiles attach and detonate, which is going to be really solid, especially for this season since the fusion rifle meta is very strong with particle deconstructor. Really solid. Next up, we have the Bombardiers for the Hunter, and an excellent roll, a 65 roll. Now, it is tied mostly into discipline, but there is recovery and mobility. If you don't know what this does, when you dodge or use your class ability, it leaves behind an explosive that detonates after a short delay and will damage targets around it. So, for those people who played Modern Warfare, it's kind of like where you leave a grenade, like if you die, something like that happens, but instead, you can use this all the time when you're dodging. So, kind of an interesting roll. Not something I've used often, but it can be kind of fun to use. Titans, we have the Mark 44 stand-asides with an excellent roll. Excellent roll. Intellect at 23, recovery at 16, strength at 7, not so bad. For this one, basically what's going to happen is when you use any kind of a shoulder charge ability, you're going to get basically an overshield. And those are specifically tied to the seismic strike, the hammer strike, or the shield bash. When you have those equipped, and you're good. In addition, when you hit with those abilities, it will recharge a portion of your melee energy, which is actually really nice because then you don't need a lot of strength necessarily tied into your abilities. Again, this is one that is pretty fun, especially for people who like to shoulder charge a lot, but it's not something you need to have, but it's an excellent roll. Probably the best roll I've seen of Mark 44 stand-asides in a long time. Next up, we're going up to Winter's Guile. And this is an okay Warlock exotic, but it's tied into strength and recovery, which is actually pretty nice for this particular build. Melee kills increase melee damage. So when you eliminate enemies with melee attacks, it increases your melee damage. Nothing really much more to be said there. Not a top tier exotic, but a very nice exotic and a nice roll. All of these exotics have a really nice perk pool as well as very high stats today. Very, very nice stats. I would say in order, if I was going to pick them up, definitely make sure that you get Telesto. If you don't have that one already, make sure that you pick that one up, followed by either Mark 44 stand-asides or Winter's Guile. Bombardiers is a niche exotic. It's not something you need to have. Again, actually, all of these are pretty niche exotics, but I think the Warlock one is probably the most useful just in general. Mark 44 stand-asides, it's fun if you like to shoulder charge, but there's a lot of, I would say, better choices for Titans this season, especially bottom tree. Striker Titan is really good. There's no shoulder charge there necessarily. So I'm going to let you take your pick on those. Next, we're going to look at the legendary weapons. For the Yon 7 pulse rifle, we have Grave Robber, Swashbuckler, as well as this very nice range stat roll. The reason I really like this roll, okay, Grave Robber, melee final blows reload this weapon's magazine from reserve. So you're incentivized to melee, right? When you get melee kills with this weapon and normal kills, it will increase your damage. Now, when you actually get a melee kill, it stacks to ×5 instantly. So if you're using a pulse rifle, especially at closer ranges, this could actually be a nice roll to have. Is it a top tier pulse this season? Not necessarily. Adaptives are okay, but they're not top tier. I'd say maybe a B tier, but this is a really cool perk combination. This kind of a perk combination is really good if you can get it on an SMG. For pulse, makes it a little bit less likely to be used. Next up, we have the 7th Seraph Officer Revolver, and I'm not a huge fan of this roll, although some people might actually find some use out of it. Osmosis is an interesting perk because when you use your ability for your grenade, it changes the weapon's damage type. So this is a kinetic weapon, but say, for example, if you use a void grenade, it will actually make it a void weapon. So Osmosis is an interesting perk. Plus, this is one of these 7th Seraph weapons, so it can create and use Warmind cells. It is a nice range perk here, but it doesn't have a range masterwork. It is a reload speed masterwork. But if you combine that here with Firmly Planted, where your increased accuracy and stability and handling and firing when crouched, might be interesting. This might be an interesting perk. I'd say maybe a B tier. But it's not one of my favorite weapons. Definitely not strong in PvP. Next up, we have the 9 Hunger auto rifle. This thing was a killer during the season of auto rifles. Very, very strong. We've got multi-kill clip, which is really nice, and Zen Moment. Zen Moment is really good on auto rifles because whenever you cause damage with a weapon, it increases its stability. On a auto rifle, that's going to be really, really strong, particularly because of the fact that you're constantly doing damage whenever you're getting hits, right? So, something that is very nice, very strong to have. Something I definitely look into picking up if you don't have a 9 Hunger. Next up, we have the Widow's Bite, which is not a bad sniper rifle, but the fact that it's a rapid fire frame makes it a little bit less likely to be used, to be honest with you. It has a nice perk here, opening shot and handling, which is really nice. Those two things together are really nice. But since it's a rapid fire frame, it has a very, very low amount of impact. And the problem with that is if you use that, you're not going to be able to one-shot people out of their supers. Say, for example, in PvP. And primarily, snipers are mainly used for PvP. The only exception is certain snipers work really well in certain high-end level content, like say, for example, Grandmasters. They're pretty strong, but there's way better choices. And the fact that this is an energy weapon, I would say you can go ahead and skip this one today. We have Field Prep and Opening Shot on a Wishbringer, which is really nice, especially for those people who like to run Wishbringer. This isn't bad. We've got the increased ammo reserves, faster reload, stow, and ready when you're crouching. If you like to crouch a lot when you're using your Wishbringer, you certainly might want to look at this. It's got Barrel Shroud, which is interesting because that'll boost your handling speed, along with the range masterwork. Unfortunately, the two options here aren't great. We have the greatly increases magazine size. It doesn't really matter on a shotgun necessarily, and it greatly decreases your reload speed. Whereas steady rounds here slightly decreases range, so that kind of takes away from that range masterwork, and greatly increases stability. Stability on a shotgun isn't very strong, so it looks okay, but it's probably not top tier. There have been better rolls. Next up, we have the Temptations Hook, and we have a decent roll on here. I'd say probably another B roll this week. Swordmaster's Guard, Relentless Strikes, and On Guard. Pretty nice in general, but not top tier. We would definitely want to be looking for Swordmaster's Guard and then Jagged Edge. That's just the standard on swords. But if you don't have this one, this is a caster frame, and it's the only arc caster frame in the game. If you don't have it, just pick it up so you have it. Otherwise, keep looking for different perk pool options. Next up, we have the bottom dollar with Pulse Monitor and Dragonfly. Kind of an interesting perk here. It is one of the few void weapons that will actually have a Dragonfly on it, so that actually makes it a really cool perk to have. It's an aggressive frame, high damage, high recoil. This thing used to be a monster when 120s were really, really strong in PvP, but right now they're not amazing. I'd say pick it up if you're looking for a Void Dragonfly weapon. It's not top tier. It might be a better option to look for some different options. Okay, so now, armor pieces. Let's take a look. We've got for the Warlock, nothing really standing out too much. This is probably the best thing you can get right now. You've got nicely tied into intellect and recovery. And in general, what I look for in all characters is you start out with recovery, because recovery will allow you to get your life back as soon as you possibly can, which will help you get back into the fight. It doesn't even matter if it's PvP or PvE. Recovery is top tier stat. You want to be looking for that all the time. And this has got a nice rolled recovery stat here. Then it's also got intellect, which is really good for all characters. After that, you can sort of craft your build and be a little bit more adjustable on it. I would say the legs are probably the best pickup this week. Mobility isn't necessarily the top tier thing you'd want to have on Warlock. Strength is interesting, especially for the Warlocks, because there's a lot of things in a lot of builds that you can use together. Say, for example, if you're using Top Tree Dawnblade, you can actually have your strength be a little bit higher if you're not running Sunbracers like an extra exotic to boost up your melee damage regeneration. It could be good to have, but honestly, if I were to pick up any armor pieces for the Warlock this week, I would pick up this leg armor, but it's not top tier. There are better choices. Next up, we're going to take a look at Dim for the other classes, just because it's a little bit easier for me to do it a little bit quicker, and we can go a little bit more in depth so you folks can get a little bit more information. So we're hopping over to the Hunters this week. So for the Hunter Gauntlets, it's a 60 roll. That's not top tier. Not a bad roll for the Vigil of Heroes chest armor. The only thing I don't like about it is that it doesn't have super high intellect. Recovery is okay. Mobility is super high, which is really good because on Hunters, that will allow you to get your dodge on your class ability bag a lot faster. That's a maybe. That's a maybe, especially depending on your build. If you like to use that, that could be pretty good. Next up, we've got really no other good options, honestly, for the hunter. Everything is below 60, which to me would be a lower tier stat. Look for anything that's 60 or higher. That's really going to be your go-to, and class items don't even matter. So, because they're basically all 0 on everything, and then you can kind of craft it however you'd like to. Okay, Titans, let's look at you, and that is going to be it for XUR today. For Titans, we've got nothing really standing out so much. Now, here, let me talk about this. This is a perfect example of something that looks better than it is. If you look at this, the resilience is really high, so that's really good on Titans because resilience ties into their class ability, which is the ability to make barriers. The only problem is you've got strength, discipline, resilience, and mobility. The 2 stats you don't really have, intellect and recovery. And so you're going to be backing out of a lot of fights in case if you need to actually get them, and you're going to get your super a little bit less. So I actually think that that's a pass, but it looks good on paper, but it's really not. Finally, for this Vigil of Heroes, this is probably your best piece of Titan gear today. We've got intellect at 24, great if you're looking to rebuff your super. Recovery is okay at a 10 stat. Resilience is 12. This is actually probably your next best roll. In terms of recovery, there isn't anything really super duper strong. The recovery here is okay, but a 57 stat roll is not super high. Anyway, that is going to be XUR for today. He's on the EDZ. Definitely pick up Telesto if you haven't done so. I appreciate every single person watching the video. You guys are awesome. Thank you, everybody. Good hunting, and I'll see you next time in the universe of Destiny.